Hey everyone, welcome back to Toasty TCG. Today I want to talk to you guys about one of my favorite decks, where you call it like Bant Pile, Turbo Fog, or just Group Hug. I play Angus Mackenzie as the commander. This is 100% a proxy, just to get that out of the way. The reason I like this deck so much is I wanted to build a commander where I could play longer games of Magic without sitting there like playing like stacks or like just like having like games kind of like dirtle out and nothing happens too much, or I'm just playing like some like low power like pre-con level deck where it's just like you play like massive like 10 drop mana spells that don't really do anything. So I wanted to play a deck where it's like it's super interactive, it keeps up at higher tables, but also has like this ability to like grind games and kind of like go under the radar. So at first I built a Selesnya version of this deck with Glunch the Bestower. That deck was pretty fun, but I did want to get around to like blue mana because there's a lot of cool group hug type stuff in blue, and I also wanted to have access to counter spells. So that's how I ended up with Angus Mackenzie. Angus by himself, you just you pay Bant, you tap him, and he is a fog. So if you don't have any of your fogs in hand, you can cast your commander, and this guy by himself is a fog. And the goal of this deck is to play very similar, like if you enjoy games like Trouble in Terrorist Town or Village of Salem, if I remember it's called, where it's like you're kind of just like trying to go under the radar, not be detected by anyone, that you're like the actual threat, and then at the last moment you pop out and just take the game, you would enjoy this deck a lot. Pretty much the goal of this deck is to dirtle the game and get down to that like point where it's like it's just you and one other player, and then at that point they're not going to be able to beat you through combat damage because Angus Mackenzie, your fogs, removal, interaction, and I'll show you like the actual win cons at the very end, see if you guys can figure it out before I actually show you those win cons, because they're pretty spicy. So Angus Mackenzie is our commander. So let's get into the group hug factor of this deck first. There's only 8 cards that actually make it group hug. Collective Voyage, Minds Aglow. These two are both Join Forces cards. You and everyone else can pay any amount of mana to search up some basics or draw some cards equal to whatever the whole table pays. These 2 cards can accelerate some games. You don't want to play cards in this deck where unless your opponent play lands from their hands. But you want to play the group hug factors, kind of like card draw and deck thinning. So these 2 are very good at that. Words of Wisdom is an instant speed draw 2, helps everyone else draw 1. Of course, we got Howling Mine, Kami of the Crescent Moon, and Dictative Prefix. Each player has an additional draw. This one you can flash in, so you can do it on the end step in rotation. That's going to be before your draw, so you'll be able to get this first. And then Kami's actually a 1/3, so it can block. It's kind of nice. And then, of course, Howling Mine. Just good extra draws. Makes you like, oh, thanks for playing that. I'm going to leave you alone. And then Temple Bell and Jace Belrin. Both kind of like controllable. Each player draws a card. You get to usually make sure you're doing it what's most beneficial for you. So like Jace you do on your own turn, of course, and you get that draw for it. You get to use that card for everyone else. And then just like Temple Bell, you can just do this every rotation end step before yours, so that way you get to use the card usually that you draw before everyone else does. But are both cards that make the table draw and like you more and leave you alone. That's kind of like the goal of the deck, of course, just like get the heat off your back, make everyone else target each other, give everyone else a bunch of resources they can beat each other up with. Onto the fog part of this deck. We're going to start with Holy Day, Ethereal Haze, and of course, Fog. Prevent all combat damage. Ethereal Haze, though, is prevent all damage to be dealt by creatures, so that can come up if it's like a Walking Ballista and you're able to like interact with the Walking Ballista in like a neat way. Lull, Pollen Lullaby, Haze of Pollen, just some more fogs. These pretty much just prevent all combat damage. Pollen's a little bit unique because it has Clash, so the player who wins, if you win the Clash, your opponent's creatures don't untap. Dawn Charm is kind of a unique fog. because it has the choose ability, so you can generate your creatures, or you can counter a spell that targets you. But most of the time you're choosing it for the fog. Moon Mist, this kind of just like a filler fog. If you want to play like Arachnogenesis, that's actually what this card should be, but I just haven't been able to get a hold of one. But yeah, you play that one. Defend the Hearth, just another fog. This card is Tangle. So Tangle is a fog that whenever you cast it, whatever is being fogged, those creatures don't untap. So on your opponent's next untaps, they swing out at you, you tangle them, their attacking creatures don't untap next untap. Commence Festivities is just a fog. Respite, you gain life for each attacking creature. Nefarious Protection, you pretty much a fog, you phase out, you gain protection from everything. Probably the best fog there is. Solitary Confinement is an enchantment that prevents you from taking damage, and you gain Shroud, but you skip your draw step, and then on your upkeep you have to either sacrifice Solitary Confinement or discard a card. Obscuring Haze, it's the Ikoria cycle. It's one where you can play if you control your commander for free, and that's just a fog. And then finally, Chromatic Escape. So this one has Suspend. Until your next turn, creatures can't attack you, and then the spell goes back in Suspend with 3 counters on it. So every 3 cycles, you get to cast your Chromatic Escape, and it's kind of like a fog for that rotation. So those are the majority of our fogs. Next up, removal. So we're going to start with Soul Guide Lantern. This is like an honorary removal. Enters the battlefield, it hits something out of the grave. You can sack it to remove each opponent's grave, or you can sack it to draw a card. This can be pretty backbreaking with how this deck plays. It's also so you have removal for grave decks. Return to Nature. This is probably my favorite card in all of green. Has 3 modes. It's a 1 in a green instant. You can break an artifact, break an enchantment, or you can exile a card from grave. This is one of the most flexible cards in the game. Highly recommend if you're ever playing green deck that make sure Return to Nature gets into that deck. And then at 1 in a white, it's Return to Nature again, but it doesn't exile from grave, disenchant. We got Generous Gift, hits any permanent and gives the controller a 3/3. Speaking of break any permanent, his controller gets a 3/3. We've got Beast Within, Krosan Grip, split second, Return to Nature, but again doesn't hit artifacts or enchantment. So I guess it's more of like split second disenchant. Swords to Plowshares, makes people gain life. You could also play Path to Exile in here, so that way you thin a land out of your opponent's decks. That could work if you want to play that. Oblation is kind of like a Chaos Warp. The card gets shuffled away, and then the controller draws 2. March of Otherworldly Light. Additional cost, you can exile white spells from your hand to make it cheaper, and that can hit artifact, creature, or enchantment with CMC less than whatever you pay into X. Final white spell, we got Farewell. Not much to say here. This card is just all-encompassing. It's everything but planeswalkers. Hits whatever you want. This deck is just really good at having removal, and just having like answers like this helps you make sure, like, if your opponent has like a wide board, or you can see like a combo coming, or their grave has like something going on. Farewell is super excellent at just dealing with everything. Onto our little blue package, we've got Rewind. Counterspell that untaps equal to the 4 mana that you put into it, so it lets you remove something on the stack, and then you have that 4 mana up for another removal spell, such as Arcane Denial. Instead of playing Counterspell, I went with Arcane Denial because it includes the ability to make the opponent draw, so that actually it's removal plus deck thinning your opponent. Fierce Guardianship, just the free Counterspell for non-creatures. And then finally, Cyclonic Rift. The one thing about this deck is, since you're drawing your opponent a lot of cards, they're of course going to always have like follow-up play. So when you Psych Rift them, you usually want to Psych Rift on an end step. It's super mean, but like whoever's the most ahead on their end step, you go Psych Rift, everything goes back to everyone's hand, and then out there in their end step, they have to discard down to 7. It's a really mean combo, but it's also like really cool when you do get to pull that off. Onto the card draw for the deck. We're going to start with Smuggler Share. This card works super well with your group hug cards because on every end step, for each opponent who drew a card or drew 2 or more cards, you get to draw. And then you make a treasure for each opponent who had more lands enter, 2 or more lands. So it's like your group hug stuff, say you have like your Howling Mine in play. On their upkeep, they draw 2 cards right away. So this has already met conditions to draw you a card on that end step. So it's super easy to resolve the first ability. The second ability, your opponents kind of have to play into most of the time. If you have Collective Voyage, then you'll be able to Smuggler Share, get the second ability, but usually you're just playing this as card draw. Esper Sentinel, it's just Ristic Buddy. Your opponents pay 1 on their non-creature spells, or you draw a card. Land tax, just kind of like cool deck thinning. Make sure you never like miss your lands. Abundant Harvest is another one of my favorite green cards. It's kind of like an upstart goblin, but for Magic, where you just you're playing like a 98 card deck now, and this is just whatever card type you need it to be. If you need land, then you get to Abundant Harvest for your next land, or you can go for literally anything else. Make sure you don't draw into a land. Mystical Tutor. So usually Mystical Tutor, or tutors in general, you're usually using them to get your combo piece, something to win the game. In this deck, you use it in a very flexible way, where you're actually just trying to use it to maybe like get your group hug piece, get like ramp if you need it, get removal if you need it. It's very rare that Mystical Tutor is actually a win con in this deck. It's usually more of like a board wipe or card draw. Sylvan Library lets you kind of like craft your what you're going to draw into. But sometimes this card is actually super dead, because when you have all those cards on the battlefield that just say take extra draws on your draw step, it kind of turns the Sylvan Library off. But that's okay. Like if you see it like early and you don't see like your group hug cards, then it can be like a bit of a swing on like how well this card works in this deck. Ristic Study goes along with Ristic Buddy. Opponents pay on their spells, you draw a card. Usually they're not going to pay because you're drawing them so many cards that they don't really care. Or like I mentioned, like this deck goes very under the radar. It doesn't really try to like do anything that like seems threatening to the rest of the table. So you can usually just go like sit on this Ristic Study and people are like, yeah, sure, you can draw. You have like Angus, Mackenzie, and just like some lands, and you haven't done anything this whole game. Sure, why not? And then finally Windfall. Super good card in this deck because you're drawing your opponent so many cards that there's always going to be someone with 7 cards in hand. And if you're starting to gas out, then Windfall will just get you right back into the game. Also, everyone except the person that had 7 cards in hand is going to be like pretty much on your side because you drew them cards too. Windfall is like super good in this deck just because like there's like the mentality it puts people in towards what you're doing. Next up, I don't know like where to place these cards. These are kind of like combo stoppers. Profane Memento is so if you're playing against a graveyard combo, like a Zulaport Cutthroat, Blood Artist type infinite combo. Anytime a creature hits an opponent's grave, you gain a life. And then Valkmira, Protector Shield. So if a opponent's spell or ability would target you, or a permanent you control, if they don't pay 1, it's countered. And then if a source an opponent controls would deal damage to you or a permanent, you prevent 1 of that damage. So the reason that this card is really good is against things such as Walking Ballista, where they go Heliod, Walking Ballista, attempt to machine gun you. And then the first ability just prevents that. The second ability prevents them from actually even being able to target you because they have to pay the 1 over and over again. And typically the Heliod the combo is like Walking Ballista hits you for 1, Heliod puts the 1/1 counter on it if I remember right, and then you just keep doing that. Even if they make infinite mana and can pay the 1 over and over again, every time they hit you for 1, that 1 damage just gets prevented. A lot of infinites that win by dealing damage lose to this card very badly because you just prevent every iteration of that 1 damage being dealt to you, or if they attempt to target you like 20 million times, they have to pay 20 million mana. These 2 cards work very well at like preventing you from losing to infinites, and once the rest of the table gets wiped out by that type of infinite, now you're in that like preferred situation of the 1v1, where now you have like so much control over the game because you have like all this removal, all this way to draw cards, and then you have these 2 ways to shut off your opponent's board. Both really good cards. Ramp package is actually incredibly small. We're playing a 3 visits, a Nature's Lore, don't really need to explain these. Urza the Lord Protector, reduces your instants and sorceries, and I guess your artifacts by 1. And then finally a Smothering Tithe. Again, Smothering Tithe, people will usually just not pay the 2, because it's just like, again, it's that type of situation where it seems like you're not doing a whole lot. You're just playing like maybe 1 thing a turn, or you're just like leaving your mana open and passing usually. So usually people just like don't care about your tax abilities, and they'll just let you have whatever. These are our Graveyard Shufflers, because the overall like issue with this strategy is you're playing a lot of instants and sorcery, so eventually like the idea is like the rest of the table's thinking, okay, this deck's gonna gas out, it's gonna go through all this interaction, and if it doesn't win by the time that happens, the deck loses. But these 3, this is actually also a fog. This is a cantrip, and this is you gain 5 life, and then you shuffle your library. So this one is really good because it works at instant speed, and it makes a target player shuffle your yard. So you can use it against a graveyard strategy to kind of like, it's like a pseudo Bajuka Bog. Clear the Mind, just again, target player shuffles their yard. You usually want to target yourself with these, just so you can get like all your interaction back in. Like, I think one of the most backbreaking things that you can do with this deck is, say, like, you loop your big, like, removal. Like, if you shuffle Farewell back into your deck, if you shuffle Psych Rift back into your deck, if you shuffle, like, Soul Guide Lantern back into your deck, those can be extremely backbreaking, because by the time you're shuffling your grave into your deck, you don't have a whole lot of cards left in deck, and just, like, getting everything right back together, and now you're just, like, ready to go, you have a fresh deck again. Extremely backbreaking stuff right there. Or if you just hit your graveyard opponent's deck, these are really good. Sometimes the gain 5 life does come up. But yeah, you definitely want these 3 just so you can continue playing the game, make sure you get your removal back. And if you have like your draw engines going, then you're just going to draw into all that removal over time. So those 3 cards are pretty necessary. These 4 cards I didn't really have a space for, so like I put them here. Wizard's Class, it gives you no maximum hand size. That's actually the relevant effect of this. Since you're drawing so many cards with the group hug effects, the Rhystic Study, the Esper Sentinel, and then just like any other card draw that you come across, having no maximum hand size is pretty important. I was gonna play Thought Vessel, but I just didn't really feel it. I felt like I wanted all of the cards in my deck to do something besides just being ramp or like something like that. So I didn't play a whole lot of mana rocks. Like you'll notice there's no Soul Ring in this deck. The only reason I play the Nature's Lore in 3 visits is they're actually deck thinning. There's like a little deck thin strategy in there. Smothering Tithe just like cause my opponent have to tap down mana, so if I'm drawing them cards, they'll have that 2 less mana to cast things with, and then Urza is just like a really good cost reduction for the deck. But for the most part, I don't want to play ramp too much in this deck because it's not really thinning me out too much. It's not getting me into my interaction, and I just don't want to play ramp too much in this deck. Whereas this pretty much serves the purpose of Thought Vessel. You have no maximum hand size, and then it can also draw you 2 cards. So I liked Wizard Class. It could go in like the card draw section of this deck, but you're really just playing it for the first ability. Next up is Seedborn Muse. I don't really need to explain this card too much. It's just like being able to untap everything over and over again. You're drawing so many cards. You always have like you always want to have open mana for your interactive plays, and this deck plays so much interaction that sometimes you can go through someone's entire turn using a lot of your interaction, tapping out to stop someone from like going infinite or trying to like do some like crazy stuff, because that's kind of like what this deck is. It's kind of like the pod arbiter. You kind of sit there and just like determine what will resolve, what won't resolve. typically when like something crazy is about to happen, the rest of the pod kind of looks at you for the answers when you're playing this deck. And Seaboard Muse kind of helps with that. The only kind of like stack sort of thing I play in this deck is Meekstone. Any creature with power 2 or greater than 2 may not untap during the untap step. And keep in mind, Angus Mackenzie is a 2/2, so he will still be able to untap. So you might be thinking like, oh, I'm sure you play like Ghostly Prison or Propaganda, and I actually don't play either of those because, again, something like, say, like a go wide green deck, they can usually pay the 2. If they're making like a ton of mana, they're usually able to take a turn where they just swing out on you, tap down all their lands to pay the 2 on everything and kill you, versus just having a fog where, you know, they're still going to attack you either way, except now you can go like Fog and go Tangles. Now they miss their untap. You can go Respite, so you gain a bunch of life when they attack. I think the Fogs are much better than the like pay the 2 or don't attack me type things. So like, because now your opponent still commits to that play, and now that they tapped out, it actually gives someone the opportunity to kill the first person. So like green player attacks me, they tap all their creatures out, I Fog. Now like a third or fourth player can attack the green player and kill them, and now that's one less player, and it kind of like gets me down to that like goal of I want to get to the 1v1 where this deck completely thrives and dominates. So it's the only like kind of thing I play like that, where my opponents they kind of hurts their ability to attack me, and it also complements Fogs really well, because if someone tries to swing out at me and I have Meekstone and a Fog, now they, 1, don't deal any damage, and 2, now their creatures can't untap. The final like variant card is Heliod, the Radiant Dawn. Its ETB can get you an enchantment from your yard to your hand, and then like the more relevant side is the Warped Eclipse. Your spells all have flash. For each 1 card your opponent's drawn, your spells cost 1 less, and we are kind of making our opponents draw 2 usually, so most of our spells will cost 2 less. Now, if you haven't seen a trend over all these themes and strategies, now it's time for the actual win con of this deck. If you're wondering that there is one, I've definitely been told before, it's like, yo, what's your actual win con? Are you just like trying to stall the game? This deck actually has a way to win. We deck them out, or we Aetherflux one-shot them. So Aetherflux Reservoir doesn't need too much explaining. Pay 50 life, hit someone for 50, and it's also like a life gain. Tasha's Hideous Laughter makes each opponent exile until the cards they exiled CMC is 20 or more. And this is another card where if you're recurring it and casting it again over and over again, super backbreaking. Decimator Web. This card has 3 different win cons written on it. For 4 mana, and then tapping it, paying 4 mana. Make target opponent lose 2 life. They get a poison counter, and they mill 6. You're usually winning off that mill 6 ability, but the other 2 abilities can come up if they're playing like a life gain type deck, or like if they're playing any like Eldrazi's, that where they're like shuffling things back in. If they're able to remove poison counters, so you have 2. You usually have like 2 to 3 different ways to kill someone with the Decimator Web. Sands of Delirium. You pay X, you mill someone for X. This card is just super straightforward, works very well with Seaboard Muse. That's a really powerful combo. And then finally, the strongest one is Folio Fancies. This card's kind of like Group Hug. Players don't have a maximum hand size, so now when they're drawing all their extra cards, they don't have to worry about discarding. XX, each player draws X. And then finally, the win con ability, 2 in a blue. Each opponent mills equals number of cards in their hand. So you're drawing people a bunch of cards, and now you're just going to turn all that card draw you've given them into power for Folio Fancies to deck people out. So that makes up all the themes. For my land base, I only played 3 islands. Like I mentioned before, this deck was originally a white-green Glunch the Bestower deck. So when I added blue into it, I wasn't really sure what to cut for my land base. So I only played a handful of islands. Usually when I collect a voyage, I grab these 3 islands. A good chunk of plains. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then forests, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So there's all the basics right there, 19, 20, 20, 22 basics. On to our non-basics, we have Breeding Pool. So this makes up for the small amount of blue mana. The fetch land for it, Misty Rainforest. We have Temple Gardens. And we have Windswept Heath. We've got the Flooded Strand and the Hollowed Fountain. So the fetches and the shocks for this color pairing. Exotic Orchard for color fixing. Command Tower also for color fixing. Baroker's Hideouts, a fetch for any of our basics. Reliquary Tower, another no maximum hand size card. And then we play 3 green-blue dual lands. You have 2 or more opponents enters untapped. Control forest or island enters untapped. And then if you have 2 or more other lands enters untapped. So that is the deck profile. I think it has like a average CMC curve of like 2.40, somewhere in that general area. But yeah, that is my just Bant pile. I kind of built it over a course of a couple months, just kind of like changing it around. Every time I play the deck, I kind of like observe like how other people win or how other people interact with the deck, and I made changes accordingly to make it so it got the goal that I wanted of being able to play a long game, but being able to play a super interactive game where it's not just like play land pass, play land pass, play land pass, then like 10 turns later cast my first spell for the game. Because like I enjoy those longer games, but I don't like when longer games also feel slow, if that makes any sense. So that was like my idea behind like how I got to this deck. I really enjoy like Control, and I know Control can be very hard to play in Commander because those 1-for-1 interactions just lose as soon as your opponent has like a Wrath of God or an Expropriate or take 2 extra turns. So I wanted to build a deck where I'm able to hold my own against like the explosiveness of Magic, or well, of Commander, and still play at like a pace that I enjoy. So that was my Bant deck profile. If you want like a deck profile, I'm probably going to put a link to it in the description. It might be a little bit outdated, so feel free to ask like what happened to like certain cards or anything like that. Give me any kind of thoughts or ideas that you might have for this deck. Again, this is like one of my favorite decks, so I'm totally like open to like how it can change and improve it. If I were to add a 4th color to it, I think it would be black, because there's things like Darkness, Orcish Bowmasters, Revenge of the Ravens. There's a lot of different cards in black that I want to try in this deck, and I think the commander would be the new Atraxa, the Unifier, if I remember the name of it, where it's like, it's ETB, you reveal the top 10 of your library and get 1 card type of each to your hand. I think that's like a really cool card draw engine, and if I were to play black, I think that'd be like the commander I'd go with for this like pile that I built. But yeah, that's like my thoughts and all that on this deck. Let me know what you think about the like the black variant too. If you have any ideas, like give me suggestions for the 4-color variant of this. The only reason that like was holding me back is Angus is such a good commander for this deck, because him by himself, if my opponent doesn't have enough removal, he can win the 1v1, just because now my opponents effectively don't have combat now. But yeah, I think like this is the 3rd time I'm gonna say it. Those are all my ideas on the deck. I hope you enjoyed the profile. Make sure to like, subscribe, leave a nice comment about this, and until next time.